Hello, I am Dennis Dostert, your host for Understanding Town Government. Today we will look at the role of the Zoning Board of Appeals, a board I just happened to chair. As we discussed in another show, Guilford passed its first plan of development and zoning code back in the 1950s. When you set aside different parts of town with lot coverage, setback, and other restrictions, inevitable conflicts arise between what already exists and what the rules prescribe. That is going to be especially true when the town was already 300 years old before zoning was adopted. The group of 5 citizen volunteers who straighten out these conflicts is the Zoning Board of Appeals. If you wish to make improvements to your property and doing so violates a zoning regulation, you must make application for a variance from the rules at Town Hall South on Boston Street. It is likely that one of the first people you will meet will be Regina Reed, our zoning enforcement officer. She is our guest today. Reggie, what do you do as zoning enforcement officer?
I assist people with questions about zoning. Most of the time it's about setbacks. How far away from the property can I build something? How tall can I build it? How many square feet of my property can I cover with a building? Interesting questions like that.
What if you find somebody is doing something that they're not supposed to do? What do you do then?
Well, usually I find out that kind of a thing when a neighbor is complaining or somebody lodges a complaint. In that case, I go out to the property, look at it, figure out what's going on, and then I contact the property owner if I can. Sometimes with cell phones today, they're not listed and you can't call people, in which case I write them a letter. And it's called a notice of violation, in which I state the regulation and what they're doing wrong and request that they fix it.
So now, how would someone discover that they needed a variance?
Usually, for the most part, they find out through us in the office. Somebody may talk to me and say, gee, I want to put an addition on my house. It's going to be 20 feet by 30 feet. And we go through the math and we look at lot coverage, or we look at setbacks, and we find out, oh, gee, you can't do it according to the regulations. But you could try to seek a variance, in which case, if the variance is approved, then that's something that you'll be able to do.
And what is this about, an A2 survey? What is that about?
The Zoning Board of Appeals requires an A2 survey for applications that are submitted to them. The reason for this is that is the most accurate survey that one can have, and it depicts exactly conditions on the property and proposed conditions that the applicant wishes to do. And it also enables the board to be able to look at these maps and see what's there and see what's being requested.
Well, what is an A2 survey?
That is something that's done by a land surveyor in the town of Guilford. Not a land surveyor from Guilford, it could be from any place. But that person goes out to the property and they actually survey it to an A2 standard. After that's done, they take that information and put it on a map and create a map of the property. And the map will show the property lines, it'll show the building setback lines, it'll show where a house is, where any accessory structures are, like a garage or barns or swimming. And it will also show what the proposed project is that the applicant wishes to do.
Well, especially important are septic tanks and location of septic systems.
Well, they are, because many times somebody would want to do something that would actually comply with the zoning regulations, but in order to do that, they'd have to build over the septic tank, and that is not an option. It's not something that the health department would approve.
What should an applicant expect when appearing at Town Hall?
They expect to be greeted by someone, treated courteously. If it's a zoning question, many times I will talk to the person. If I'm not there, George Kroll, our town planner, will, or Katie Arbuckle, our planning and zoning administrative assistant.
And you will give the people the applications that they have to fill out, and will you explain to them how they have to be filled out?
Oh, we certainly do. As a matter of fact, it's not uncommon for me to have someone come and sit in my office, and I actually start filling them out for the person. I give them the regulation number, I give them the setback requirement, if it's for setback, height requirement, or if it's for lot coverage or floor area. I help them with that too. And then leave it up to them to fill in their name and address and things like that. We try to assist as much as we can because we understand that people aren't used to filling out these forms, and it can be kind of a scary thing. So we try to help, and normally if it's a homeowner doing an application on their own, what they will do is take what I started, take it home, work on it, they'll get their survey, and then many times they come back to the office to make sure they have everything just right. We check it over. If it isn't, we make recommendations or corrections, and then they're ready to submit it to the Zoning Board of Appeals to be heard at the next available meeting.
Now, the rules say that an applicant must have a hardship
Correct.
caused by the zoning regulations to get a relief. What does that mean? What is the nature of a workable hardship, and what are its limitations?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons for hardships. One of the things is there is something unique about their property that makes it different from all the other properties in town. Say, for instance, a corner lot. That's a very difficult lot to work with because you have street lines on both sides, and the setbacks are usually greater than they would be if the lot was not on the corner. We have some lots in town that are actually triangular in shape. Those are very difficult lots to work with. We have lots that are odd shaped, and that is problematic to homeowners. Another thing that could happen is topography. Let's suppose they want to build a swimming pool, and they would really like to put it where the regulations say it should be, so it meets the regulation setbacks, say, for instance. But in the back of their house there's a steep drop-off, and so it prevents them from being able to put it where zoning says it can be, so they have to try to put it in a different spot. Many times that violates the zoning regulations. That's a really a hardship in the topography of the property. Sometimes it's sanitary systems or placement of the well. Sometimes there are trees that are valuable and they don't want to cut them down, and so they have to try to adjust placement of a building or a structure so that they don't cut the trees down, but yet it doesn't meet the zoning setbacks. Most of our applications are really for setback requirements and for lot coverage. Now, I should talk about lot coverage, because I don't think anybody knows really what that is. For every zone in town, there is a certain amount of lot coverage that all the buildings, that means your house, your garage, your swimming pool, your tennis court, your shed, virtually everything except your doghouse can occupy on the property. And there's also a percentage for each zone that these structures can occupy. Say, for instance, in North Guilford, we have R8 zoning. That's 4 acres. And because of that, they're allowed 5% of lot coverage. Well, that's a lot if you have 4 acres of land. But it becomes problematic in some of these properties which were rezoned toward the end of 1979, and they were only 2-acre properties. And so to try to meet a 5% lot coverage requirement is difficult and Many times people can't do it. But that is a hardship in the sense that zoning's done it to you. And so they have no choice but to come to the Zoning Board of Appeals and seek a variance.
And I understand that you can't expect a variance if your only hardship is an economic hardship, like it would be cheaper to do it this other way.
Well, that's true, and that's written in the state statutes, and certainly the Zoning Board of Appeals cannot approve an application if the applicant says, well, you know, I could really put it where the zoning regulations say I should put it, but it would cost me a lot of money to put this addition there or this building there, so I want to do something else. That is something that they could not approve.
Okay. Are most applications able to be handled by the property owner?
For the most part, yes. I've seen many, many property owners make very successful applications. The key is there a real bona fide hardship? And if there is, then they certainly are able to make the application. They do have to get an A2 survey done by a licensed surveyor. That's one of the mapping requirements of the Zoning Board of Appeals. But aside from that, they could fill out the application themselves. They can appear before the board themselves, explain their application, show them the map, you know, point on the map where the problem is and what they want to do. And I think, Dennis, you know, you're chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. People have been very successful.
Yes. Yeah. When they talk to you first and you explain to them how to do it, they are very successful. Is there any times when one might need a lawyer or other professional help other than a surveyor?
Well, that all depends. Sometimes what I usually say to people is this: talk to your neighbors and explain to them what you're doing, so it's not a mystery and it's not a surprise to them. Explain what your project is and listen to what they have to say. Occasionally, somebody really has a hardship and they have some neighbors that aren't really crazy about the rules being bent. In that case, maybe they should hire an attorney. But for the most part, attorneys come into play when it's a difficult or complicated application. Say, for instance, when I'm trying to think, when Walmart wanted to expand their store space and they wanted to have an outdoor display area for garden equipment and plants. In that case, they hired an attorney, and that was the proper thing to do. But for the most part, I really don't think the homeowner needs to have an attorney. It's only when it's really, really complicated.
Yeah, we actually, from the point of view of the chairman, when an attorney appears, a kind of little alarm goes off, I think, in our heads that something is up, you know, or may be up. And it's very often, unless you think there's going to be a problem, you're better off presenting the application yourself.
Well, that's true, but sometimes, Dennis, I have to tell you, an applicant is just nervous. Yeah. I mean, it means so much to them. This is their home. This is something they want to do. It's very near and dear to them, and they're just so afraid that they're not capable of presenting to the board that they do hire an attorney. And in that case, I guess alarms shouldn't go up.
Yeah.
It does happen. I see people do it frequently because they just can't take the stress or maybe they're not good at speaking to a group and they just don't want to have any part of it. They'd be very comfortable having a professional do that for them.
And a public hearing has to be held on a variance application. Now, when and where are they, and what exactly is a public hearing? What happens to you at a public hearing?
Well, First of all, the Zoning Board of Appeals meets once a month. It's always on the fourth Wednesday of the month, except for the month of November and December. And when they meet, their meetings are in the Faulkner Room, which is on the second floor of the community center. And all the applications that are heard are what we call a public hearing. That means that the public can come and comment for or against the application. They can ask questions, and they could give their opinion to the board about whether they think the application should or shouldn't be approved. Public hearing means that it's advertised twice in the newspaper, 2 Thursdays before the meeting. It means that you have to have a vote of 4 members to approve an application. Actually, that's a state statute. And it is recorded. We record it by a tape recorder. It is not video recorded like the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, but that is in the event that somebody should take an appeal against a decision that's made by the Zoning Board of Appeals and it goes to court. We have a record upon which we can transcribe and present the evidence to the court.
Yeah, I think that's an important fact that the audience needs to know, that the Zoning Board of Appeals is a little bit different than many of the other boards in that it requires a supermajority.
Yes.
To grant your application, 4 out of the 5 members have to vote for it. If it's only 3 out of 5, it's a simple majority. It does not pass. It fails. So the state law makes it a little bit more difficult to get a variance from the rules.
It does. It does, and that makes people nervous too.
Yeah.
But that's the way the system is set up. The Zoning Board of Appeals gets their powers from the state statutes. It's Chapter 126 zoning. And what that says, Dennis, is that the Planning and Zoning Commission in Guilford creates the zoning regulations. They write the language for the regulations. And the state realized that you cannot have the same entity that makes the regulations make exceptions to them. That would just be a total conflict of interest. So the state created the Zoning Board of Appeals, and their sole purpose is to grant variances and also to hear appeals of the zoning enforcement officer. That means if I send someone a letter and they don't agree with it, they don't think that I've interpreted the regulations correctly, then they could go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and make their case.
And once the application is approved, what happens then?
We advertise it in the newspaper, and usually in about a week and a half, the applicant receives a notice of variance. It's a document that's been typed up by our clerk, Laurie Kelly, clerk of the commission. You sign it as chairman. It's sent to the applicant, and in order for that variance to be effective, the applicant has to take that variance, notice of variance, to the town clerk's office and file it in the land records. Once it's filed in the land records, then it is good to go forever. So take, for instance, somebody gets a variance, and for whatever reason, circumstances change. Maybe somebody gets a new job and the family has to leave town. Whatever variance was granted and whatever plans were approved, any subsequent owners of the property can act upon. In other words, if, let's say, a garage was approved, then subsequent owners can build that garage, because a variance isn't granted to the person who's asking for it or who's requesting it. It's granted to the land. And when the Zoning Board of Appeals looks at these applications, they can't say, well, You know, that's Harry Smith, and we know he's a really nice guy, and he'll never do anything wrong, so we're going to grant that to him. They can't do that. Mm-hmm. They have to look at the property, find that there is a hardship, then grant the variance, and it goes with the land.
There's sometimes when the zoning board can make a temporary
yeah,
permit.
Sometimes they sort of put what I call a sunset time limit on a variance, maybe for 1 or 2 years. And there's various reasons for that. I could remember one time there was a subdivision application that was made, and the people wanted to keep a home that was on the property, but once the subdivision was approved, the home would become non-conforming, and they wanted to keep it for 2 years, and then they were going to remove the home. But they had to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and get that approved.
So on occasion, the zoning board does make temporary.
They do. They absolutely do.
Now, if an application is denied, what options does the applicant have?
Well, there's a couple. One route is to make a new application and change it. You listen to what the board says, and if, let's say the board's decided that the applicant is requesting too large a variance, to try to reduce it. Let's say it's I'll use a barn, for instance, and maybe they want a variance from a barn height, and they asked for a barn that's 40 feet tall and on a downtown lot, and the board says, I don't think so. Well, you can go back and ask for a variance with a shorter structure. Or if you still, they still want to seek that variance, in 6 months they could go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals with exactly the same application and see if they get it approved then. I wouldn't recommend that route. The other thing that people can do is appeal it to the Superior Court. And that means they appeal the decision, the denial decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And they take it to court and let a judge decide whether or not it should have been denied. But if they do that, they've got to be pretty certain that they had a really good hardship to hang their hat on, because otherwise it'll be overturned.
The courts are reluctant to reverse the decisions.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
They are. It's more the case of if the Zoning Board of Appeals approves an application for someone and the hardship is sort of a weak one, and they have a neighbor who's just not happy with it. And I'll use the height reference again. Neighbor just doesn't want to see a 40-foot barn, and the ZBA approves it. If they take that to court, a judge will listen to it and listen to the record of the meeting, and may very well overturn that approval that the board made, because the hardship wasn't a true hardship. Depends on what they tell you the hardship is, or tell us what the hardship is. I try to discourage people from making appeals to the Zoning Board of Appeal if they don't really have a good hardship, but most of the times there is a hardship. There's something about the property that, just prevents them from doing what they want to do, and it is a hardship. There's something, it's topography, or as I said, an odd-shaped piece of property, maybe a corner lot, things like that.
Is there anything else our audience should know that I haven't asked about?
About the Zoning Board of Appeals? Well, I always say to people, when you go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and present your application, you have to be like a teacher. You have to show the board the map, point out on the map what it is, first of all, orient them. This is my house, this is my well, this is my septic. and then show them what you want to do and answer questions for the board. Also, the board is, it's a very nice board. I mean, nobody will criticize you. They're very professional, and they do follow policy. They do follow the state statutes, and I don't think anybody should be afraid to seek a variance as long as they have a good hardship. And they shouldn't be afraid to appear themselves in front of the board. And by all means, I'm almost always at the meetings to be there. And if nobody else is rooting for you, I will be.
I hope you have found today's show helpful. Please tune in for another show in our series. Our town is improved when all understand how our government works, our board and commissions, and will improve our quality of life. You can review these shows on the GCTV website if you are considering making an application. Have a good day.